What's up, Flannelverse? Very, very sorry for the delay. I was working on some written stuff that I needed to get done before the show, and I got it done this time before the show started, but it took me a little bit longer than anticipated. But we're good to go now. I am ready to start breaking this one down. Going to be the usual structure. You're going to be going position by position, starting with quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, defenses, kickers. And I'll be going for the full 4-game slate. This week pretty easy because DraftKings very much prioritize the full 4-game slate for the weekend rather than breaking it up into 2 days. So easier to decide what to go over this one. So I'm going over the 4-game slate to start, and then I'll take a look at both of today's showdown slates. I'm planning on doing another show tomorrow prior to there'll be another Sunday slate tomorrow, and of course both of those showdowns also. So for today, going to be doing the 4-gamer and then the 2 showdown slates for today. Hoping to be done right around 4 Eastern. Give myself about half an hour to build. We'll see if that is plausible. If I'm a little bit late, I'm okay with that. But let's get into it. Good to see many of you here. Well before I was again. Sorry to you guys who I've been keeping waiting. Well past the original time. Already pushed it back, and then I was late also. But good to see many of you here. Hopefully, I can make it up to you by helping you win some money on this slate. Of course, if you're playing GPPs, which is what I'm playing, the largest field GPPs, we're dogs. We're dogs to win money, but let's give it our best shot. We'll start at the quarterback position. We can start just looking at what's the projected ownership for the 8 quarterbacks on this slate. Lamar Jackson, you can see here, this immediately appeals to me. The 11% projected ownership going to Lamar Jackson. We'll take a look at some matchup data after we look at the ownership. Josh Allen, actually, I think this ownership has come down a little bit, so he's not far different from Lamar Jackson. So I think I'll probably be leaning into the final game of the slate a good amount, with both of these quarterbacks being under-owned, in my opinion. Jayden Daniels up at 20% projected ownership. I love Jayden Daniels, love watching him play. I don't know that I'll get to 20% Daniels on the slate. I might, just because I might cut out some of the cheaper guys. I'm not sure. I haven't decided what I'm doing there. I suspect I'll be a little bit light on Daniels and give more of that ownership to Jackson and Allen. Hurts at 10%. Seems pretty good. He's only 6,800. Goff, I'll probably be light on 16% just because Detroit spreads the ball around so much. He has had some really strong fantasy performances recently, so I can't really quibble with that too much when he's only 6,300. Mahomes, man, 22%, a bit much to me. I suspect I'll play a lot of his pass catchers, but more as one-offs, not really in stacks. Mahomes just really hasn't done much this year. Stafford, 6% projected ownership. Seems fine. Stroud, 5%. Just given their price tags are low enough, they'll allow you to play a lot more of the studs elsewhere in your lineup. So those, at a glance, look fine to me. So that's kind of where I'm falling. I think my biggest stand is going to be I'm going to be overweight on the final game with both Lamar and Josh Allen, and underweight. Certainly, Mahomes to me looks the worst, the one that I plan to be the most underweight on. But we'll go through it. Let's take a look at the schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position. Let's take a look over the past 5 weeks. So it is the best possible matchup for quarterbacks. And this does not include the wild card round, I'm pretty sure. Jayden Daniels, by this metric, does appear to have the best matchup by schedule adjusted fantasy points per game allowed to opposing quarterbacks. And it's a really nice matchup for rushing quarterbacks in particular. So I don't know. I guess from that perspective, the ownership looks okay on Jayden Daniels. Lamar Jackson does get a positive matchup, looks like around 8th best or so, primarily through the air, not as good of a matchup on the ground against Buffalo over the past 5 weeks. Actually a decent matchup for CJ Stroud. I think of that as being a tough matchup with the Chiefs defense all around. They have not been as tough recently against the pass. Still just like a little bit above neutral and more for rushing quarterbacks, looks like. So not for throwing quarterbacks, a slightly negative matchup, or at least the throwing aspect of the game. Quarterbacks score fewer than expected fantasy points through the air, which Stroud has actually been running a little bit. He ran a bit last week. Seems like he's willing to run when they need him to. So maybe he will pick up more fantasy points this week on the ground. Tough matchup for Mahomes. Houston's defense has been really tough. We saw that last week against the Chargers. Yeah, the Rams surprisingly pretty good defensively. Of course, last week I think it was just Sam Darnold not being very good. I don't know. The offensive line was also struggling there. So I don't know how much to give the Rams defense credit for the way they crushed my Vikings last week versus the Vikings just kind of imploding. But by this metric, it looks like it is a tough matchup against the Rams defense. Philly's defense just maybe the best in the league. Actually, a tough matchup for quarterbacks against Washington in recent weeks. Early in the year, it was good spot, not so much recently, and then really tough matchup for Josh Allen. Part of the reason that I think I am going to prefer Lamar Jackson, just a better matchup for Lamar. Of course, the game is in Buffalo. Really, really tight spread there. Both should have opportunities to put up a lot of fantasy points here. Okay. Oh, Matt says the schedule adjusted fantasy points does include the wildcard games. Interesting. Okay, good to know. Good to know. Okay. Yes, this is the 4-gamer is what I'm going to go over first. All right. Yeah, built up the suspense. Yeah, it was totally intentional. Thoughts on Nico Remigio? I don't think he'll get snaps today. I'm certainly not playing Nico Remigio in the 4-game slate. I doubt I play him in the Showdown slate either. Yeah, Jay Neville says, hoping the snow in Buffalo mutes the offenses a bit. I'm not. I'm hoping for the opposite. But because the ownership is kind of playing for, I think people have that expectation that it's going to slow down the game a bit. So I'm kind of playing the opposite way where I'm leaning into it because I think the offenses are good enough that they can overcome any kind of weather. But yeah, that's a good call out. We should take a look at the weather, which of course at Rotogrinders using Lineup HQ, I can just see Roth's weather right here. So Kevin Roth at Rotogrinders, note on the Baltimore game in Buffalo, absolutely frigid temps with a chance for snow. Temperatures will be in the teens during the game. While cold weather doesn't have as dramatic an impact on scoring as, say, high winds, there is a slight correlation between low temps and lower scoring games. We could also see some scattered snow showers on Sunday, though the specifics of that would likely require a pregame radar check. For now, I think the brutal cold temps and chance of passing snow is a slight bump down to offenses. So yeah, slight bump down there. The Detroit game in a dome. Okay, for Philly, this game, I guess it's in Philadelphia. Yeah, everything looks to be trending towards a snow game in Philadelphia. The extent of the snow isn't set in stone, but I do think we'll see some snow in game and likely enough of it to stick around. Winds stay manageable, 5 to 10 miles per hour sustained, gusts 15 to 20 miles per hour. It is always worth noting with snow that if the winds stay light, it can be a boost to offenses as it slows down the pass rush. Oh, that's interesting. I had never heard that before. And then the Kansas City game, cold and dry game time temps should be in the low to mid 20s with a 10 mile per hour sustained wind gusting over 20 miles per hour. While neither cold weather nor 10 mile per hour sustained winds are major downgrades, the freezing cold and somewhat breezy weather certainly isn't ideal. Slight bump down to offenses with feels like temperatures around 10 degrees. So what I'm hearing is you want to be in a dome this weekend, which Detroit, the only game in a dome. So I guess bump to those offenses. The other matchups, the other weather, not great in the other 3 games, but also none that are extremely concerning. Not like what you want to hear. You want, 70 and sunny or 60 and sunny probably. But, maybe slight bumps down to those games, and wouldn't be surprising if we end up with even worse weather than what is being expected right now. All right. If you are playing Allen, are you double or triple stacking? If I were hand building with Allen, I mean, probably not. Just he so rarely brings along multiple pass catchers. I am probably just going to require one pass catcher for Josh Allen. And honestly, maybe all my quarterbacks on a short enough slate, I make my rules less stringent. So like on a larger slate, I might require 2 pass catchers with Jared Goff, whereas on a smaller slate, I often require fewer, just because you're kind of hoping that things get really weird. And, you can hope for Jared Goff just throws 3 touchdowns, but they're all to Amon-Ra St. Brown. And 150 of his 300 yards are to Amon-Ra St. Brown, and the rest is all spread out, that kind of thing. So, yeah, if I were hand building, I would probably single or double stack with Josh Allen. Probably double stack. I still I'm more inclined to double stack than single stack, even with Josh Allen when I am hand building, but probably no more than that. Probably wouldn't want more than that on a 4-gamer. All right. Yeah, we'll get to some of those skill position players for the Chiefs. Really interesting one there. Okay, let's go. So yeah, I don't think any of the weather really changes how I'm playing this. I think that's a good enough breakdown of the quarterbacks. I understand why the field wants to go to Patrick Mahomes a good amount, and if you look at here, I'll pull up offense. They've been throwing it quite a bit in recent weeks. The Chiefs. So they rested in week 18. Go the prior 5 weeks. And then neutral situation, pass rate, Kansas City 3rd over the past 5 weeks, which you'd kind of expect. So they have been throwing it quite a bit. I get why people want to go there. It's just, I mean, have you just looking at Patrick Mahomes' game log, and I guess that's another thing we can do here. Go to advanced passing. And again, I'm going to leave off week 18 just because some of these teams were sitting, and I'll include the wild card round and go the past 6 weeks. And just take a look at the fantasy scoring in those games. So Josh Allen, 30.4 fantasy points per game. Jayden Daniels, 28.8. Lamar Jackson, 27.3. Jared Goff, 26.4. Those are the top 4 over that span, all on this slate. Kind of nuts. And then Patrick Mahomes, 19.2. So an uptick in recent weeks for Patrick Mahomes. And you can kind of make the case that in the playoffs, they're just going to lean on Mahomes a little bit more. So maybe he does see a boost in fantasy points. W says, I heard a stat that Mahomes had never been optimal in a 4+ game slate without Kelsey. Can that be true? That's nuts if that is true. I have to look into that one. But yeah, that is pretty interesting. Yeah, so final game, going to be the one that I am leaning into the most. I think, let me see if I can rank the quarterbacks here. So considering ownership, how would I rank these quarterbacks? Pretty sure it's going to be Lamar number 1. So here's the ownership right here. Just really love Lamar at 11% projected ownership. It's probably Josh Allen number 2 for me. I think when you factor in, it actually might be CJ Stroud number 3 for me, just because 5% ownership at 5,000 is pretty appealing. I didn't really expect to like CJ Stroud here, but it's been a better matchup in recent weeks for quarterbacks against Kansas City. And, in the playoffs, I kind of expect Kansas City to shut them down, but I also expect Houston to be throwing it quite a bit. And CJ Stroud, we saw last week, was willing to run when they needed him to. And he's only 5,000. So if he can, rack up 35 yards on the ground, he has to throw it the entire game to try to keep up with Kansas City, ends up throwing a couple touchdowns at 5,000. I think he's probably my 3rd favorite. So I think I'm ranking him Lamar, Josh Allen, CJ Stroud, number 3. And then probably Jalen Hurts, because he's getting 10% ownership at 6,800. Then Jayden Daniels. And then probably Mahomes over Stafford, just a really tough matchup there. I don't know. That's close between those two. Stafford so low owned and low price tag. And we saw he was really good last week. So maybe I actually rank Mahomes last of this group. I think the best case for playing Mahomes is just it's the playoffs. Like the Chiefs are probably going to be keeping their foot on the gas a little bit more. Like it kind of seems like they've been not really going all out this year. They've just been winning by kind of, I don't know, not luck, but like they haven't been going out of their way to just put teams down and out early in games, and maybe in the playoffs they'll just try a little bit harder. They're also coming off of 2 weeks of resting their starters, bye week last week, and then week 18 didn't play their starters. Who knows how that's going to affect things? I don't know. Just given that he has the highest ownership, I think I like Mahomes the least here. All right, I think that's good enough overview of the quarterbacks. So I'm going to move on to the running backs. See if we have any more questions here. Shannon says Hurts naked. He has 3 pushes and 1 passing touchdown. Yeah, I think that's fine. I usually want to be like stacking almost always. I probably am going to require stacking with all of my pass catchers once again. But I think that's like if you're hand building and you want to do Hurts naked, I think that's totally fine. All right. Anthony says Mahomes is also underpriced for how he has performed in the playoffs for his career. Yeah, I mean, I get it. Just the ownership is so high. And I think if they do get a big enough lead, they're just going to lean on their 2 running backs now. All right. D. Owens thinks it feels like a Goff blow-up spot. Certainly could be. My biggest concern with Goff is just that, so they have David Montgomery back. I think they're probably just going to run more than they have been. And they're aggressive, but they also spread the ball around so much. Just a little bit tougher. Okay. Yeah, Hockey Sean says good clock management has won them a ton of games this year. Yeah. And I don't know. Like they obviously this is playoffs. They're playing all out to win this one, whereas in some regular season games kind of felt like they want to win, but they maybe don't have the same kind of competitive drive when it's not as necessary. I mean, I guess they were still pretty close with the Bills throughout the year. So maybe I'm wrong in the feeling that they were not really going all out. Am I concerned about the Lions run game at all? Not really, just because they've been so injured all year, that and then they've just been able to crush anyway, and they're Jahmyr Gibbs, Dave Montgomery is such a good combo. I'm not super concerned about the Lions run game. All right. Let's go. Running backs. So starting with, and did I move didn't move the sidebar down. The highest projected ownership. I guess I'll just sort here by ownership. No, I'll sort by projection. Never mind. I'm going to sort by fantasy point projection. Jahmyr Gibbs projected for 46% ownership at 22.6 fantasy points on DraftKings. Awesome projection there. 7,700, so not even. He's the third most expensive. Going to get a lot of ownership as a result. And David Montgomery is back. Now there was a quote this morning that Jahmyr Gibbs still expected to be the bell cow even with David Montgomery back. Actually, let me go find the actual quote there. Maybe bell cow is not the language they use. Maybe they just said the lead back. I don't know how much I really want to read into it. Well, let's see. I think everybody's kind of expecting it to still be Jahmyr Gibbs number 1 there. I'm actually going to check Coach Beacon next Discord, see if they have. I mean, he just loves Dave Montgomery. Okay, so on the 15th, offense coordinator Ben Johnson said, with Dave Montgomery returning, the backfield split for this week is to be determined. Gibbs has certainly had a hot hand as of late, and I expect David to come in and pick up where he left off. If the last 2 days are any indication, he's of the right mindset right now. So I don't know, that to me is not an indication that it's going to be Jahmyr Gibbs show. Like he thinks David Montgomery can come in and pick up where he left off. On the 13th, Dan Campbell said David Montgomery is a huge part of us. He's a bell cow. He's a tone setter. He's a catalyst. There will be a place for him in this game. I'm not reading this as a 70-30 split. I'm reading it more as like a typical kind of 60-40 split. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe David Montgomery does not get a full workload here. I kind of think that he will. So ultimately, I'm going to come in underweight, I think, on Jahmyr Gibbs in large field tournaments at 46% ownership. I just think there are some other really strong running back options on this slate. And as much as I like him, I just think it could be more of a split than we're kind of anticipating here. And Washington's run defense, I think, is actually. I'll take a look at the matchups. after the fact, I guess. But yeah, you can see not in the top half here going against Washington in the past 5 weeks. Um, Saquon Barkley 8,200, so he's 500 more expensive than Jahmyr Gibbs and projects slightly worse than Jahmyr Gibbs. Also coming in at 10% lower ownership. I think that feels pretty good to me. Also, Philadelphia, but both these teams favored could be up and running a lot in the second half. Derrick Henry, 28% ownership at 8,000, projects again. Another little over 2 fantasy points worse than Saquon Barkley. Yeah, if you were getting more of an ownership discount, I'd be really interested in Derrick Henry. I think he's fine at this ownership. I think I'm probably around where the field is there. Kyren Williams, 6,900, 27% ownership. I suspect I'll be underweight on Kyren again, just because I think Philadelphia is such a tough matchup. Kyren is pretty volume, reliant. Needs to get a lot of volume to pay off his price tag. Of course, could just randomly have a couple touchdowns. So it's certainly possible for Kyren Williams to get there, but 27% ownership, a bit much for me at 6,900 in a really tough matchup. So I'll be light on Kyren. Joe Mixon, I think they want to run the ball a good amount. 6,500, 21% ownership. If anything, I probably come in slightly under that number, but not significantly. James Cook, 6,700, 15% ownership. That's low enough ownership that I have interest, but probably not above the field there. Just tough matchup with Baltimore. Yeah, I think it's a fine number at 6,700. David Montgomery, again, I am of the opinion that he's probably going to, like, if I had to guess the workload, I think he probably gets about 40%, and he's $2,000 cheaper than Jahmyr Gibbs, and he's getting half the ownership of Jahmyr Gibbs. I think I probably end up overweight on David Montgomery because I think they probably are going to be running quite a bit, and I suspect he'll be a big part of it, and he's relatively cheap. But the cheap guys here are very interesting to me. So Brian Robinson 5,300, Austin Eckler 5,100. Just looking at those two, I prefer Eckler. I couldn't really. I was looking for some indication in the splits of to like make the case for Austin Eckler being the pass catching back, and looking at trailing game scripts in particular, it didn't really show out the way I expected it to, where Austin Eckler took on a much bigger role when they were playing from behind. So I wanted to make the case of he's clearly better based on this. They're expected to be playing from behind, and couldn't really make that case looking just at trailing versus leading or tied game scripts. He just didn't really take on any more of the work. But he's still $200 cheaper than Brian Robinson, getting 3% lower owned. I think he's generally probably the better pass catching back. So even though I couldn't make a strong statistical case for it, I still like him at 9% projected ownership, 5,100. I think I'll be overweight to that number somewhat. I really think the Chiefs running backs are interesting. And again, there's nothing really to suggest that they are going to run significantly more when they're playing from ahead, but they could be up pretty significantly here. I mean, especially after Houston had awesome game last week. But I think the Chiefs could just wear them down, put them out in the first half, and wouldn't be surprising to see them give it to Pacheco and Kareem Hunt. I look through their past seasons just to see neither of them really has any kind of fumbling issue. Neither has a fumble yet this year. So I think they're going to trust their running backs here quite a bit. And they're both really low owned at low price tags. So Kareem Hunt in particular at 5,000 and 6% ownership stands out to me as a pretty great play. I think I want to be overweight on that number. Pacheco, I also plan to be overweight that number. Like it a little bit less than Hunt because they've been pretty even in the split since Isaiah Pacheco came back. And actually, let me pull up some of the game logs here. Actually, I'll do both of these. Let's go again. The rest of the starters week 18. Let's just see the last 5 games. Pretty sure Pacheco's been back longer than that. So 5 is safe. Then we'll take a look at the game log. So over the past 5 weeks in total, Kareem Hunt, 45 carries, Isaiah Pacheco, 49. Each has 8 targets. Neither of them running a ton of routes. So really, neither of them really separates, which makes me like Hunt better at lower ownership and a lower price tag. Even though like most of us think of Isaiah Pacheco as being better in terms of like yards per carry this year, I think they are separated by 0.1 yards per carry. So really, Pacheco has not been significantly better this year, and the team just seems to like Kareem Hunt. They trust him. So yeah, just nothing really separating them. Let's take a look at the game log also. Oh, I included week 18. Well, we can skip over that. Week 17, Kareem Hunt, 9 carries, Isaiah Pacheco, 6. Kareem Hunt ran more routes than Isaiah Pacheco. Neither of them saw a target, but it kind of seemed like things are going more in the direction of Kareem Hunt rather than Isaiah Pacheco. And in week 16, 32 snaps to Pacheco's 23, 11 carries to Pacheco's 9, 3 targets to Pacheco's 2, ran more routes. Like all indications are that the team, as much as we think they should like Isaiah Pacheco better, they might like Kareem Hunt better. And Kareem Hunt is getting lower ownership at a lower price tag. So I think Kareem Hunt is a really strong GPP play here. I also think Justice Hill, this is one where I did make the case, just looking at leading versus trailing game scripts. Like he's clearly more involved when they are trailing. He runs more routes. He is plays more snaps. And this is a game where even though they're favored, like clearly wouldn't be that surprising if Baltimore is playing from behind. So at 4,800, I think Justice Hill is a pretty strong play. You can kind of make the same case for Ty Johnson. So I do think this is a pretty good slate for taking shots on some of these backup slash not primary ball handlers, in particular Hill, Johnson, and Kareem Hunt, probably my favorite of the group at 6% ownership, just because he's kind of going to be involved in any game script. You're not really reliant on a big lead here, whereas I think Johnson and Hill to some extent is kind of reliant on playing from behind. So I really like the idea of paying down in one of my running back or flex spots for one of these cheaper running backs. All right, let's take a look at the matchups here. So again, over the past 5 weeks, great matchup against Detroit. I think it's getting tougher with Alex Anzalone back. I think it's getting they're getting more cohesive. Like they played together, the backups long enough. They looked really good against the Vikings, I thought. So even though it is the 4th best schedule adjusted matchup in terms of fantasy points per game over the past 5 weeks, I think this kind of overstates how good of a matchup it is for the Washington running backs. And I also think it's particularly good for receiving backs, which again, I want it to be Austin Eckler, but they just don't seem to be treating them as the receiving back and the running back. So they're cheap enough. I think it's fine, but I don't think this is really the best metric for looking at Washington here. Houston, again, positive matchup for Joe Mixon, but just barely. And then generally we have a lot of bad matchups. Kansas City, not a great matchup against Houston. I'm not overly concerned about it, especially when you factor in tough matchup for Derrick Henry, tough matchup for James Cook, tough matchup for the Detroit guys, Philly, LA. Like all of these teams are bottom 10 in terms of the schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed matchup over the past 5 weeks. So nothing really standing out there to me. It is pretty interesting looking at how great of a matchup it's getting against Detroit for receiving backs. And I imagine that's largely because Detroit's always leading. So teams are throwing it a lot more to try to keep up, and they're throwing it to their running backs a good amount. But that is worth noting, kind of a bonus there for honestly both Eckler and Brian Robinson, I think. What else on the running backs? We want to look at any other usage splits. Let's see. So the Chiefs, again, I think it's closer than people think it is, and actually maybe even favors Hunt. Now, who knows? Maybe that flips in the playoffs, but that's how it's been recently. The Commanders, I guess, pretty interesting to look at. So over the past 5 weeks, he returned. Actually, okay, for the Commanders, we have to look at a different. He played in the wild card round. Was he out in week 18? I don't remember if he played in week 18. I'm going to throw that in there for now. Yeah, he did. He played. 11 total carries to Brian Robinson's 15 over the past 2 games. 6 targets. Each Eckler has actually, in these games, run more routes than Brian Robinson. I guess we can take a look at the game log here. Include the wild card. Because last week, obviously, the probably closest match we have. It's a competitive game. What do they want to do right now with these running backs? And last week for the Commanders, Brian Robinson 10 carries, Austin Eckler 8. Brian Robinson played 2 more 35 snaps to Eckler's 33. 5 targets for Robinson, 4 for Eckler. Eckler did run more routes. I think this is still kind of fluky. I think Eckler's still the better pass catching back. But nothing, not the big splits you maybe expect there. I'm going to check in on chat. Any other that I should be looking at here? Yeah, exactly. I think Hunt is the preferred back, not by like a huge amount, but any coach speak on Pacheco or Hunt? Yeah, let me look. Let's see. Yes, actually. So on the 10th, good call out there. On how Reed wants to split the snaps for Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt. So I think this is before their last game, right? This isn't post game. I think it's before the last game. But he said, I don't know how they'll divvy up, but I would imagine it'll just end up being the same as we've been doing with them. They'll both be in there battling. That's the coach speak we have, and it is again over a week old. So I think that was actually before the last game. But seems to be. Oh no, sorry, they didn't play last week, so it was for this game. But yeah, expecting more of the same there. Let's see. Monty is so cheap. I should also note Montgomery, and I'm going over DraftKings, but $4,000 on FanDuel for David Montgomery. I wouldn't call him a free square, but the ownership varies pretty drastically around the industry on Montgomery at 4,000. I suspect he comes in around 50% owned, which seems fine because there is opportunity cost. Like he should be able to put up the number you need at 4,000 pretty easily, but also, you only have 3 spots where you can play a running back. Barkley in a snow game feels like a free square. I mean, he's expensive enough. I wouldn't call him a free square, but yeah, it looks like a strong play. Let's see. Jimmy says it hardly ever snows in Philly area. If it does, it ain't much. Can almost guarantee it won't be a traditional snow game. Yeah, it didn't look like the forecast is calling for a crazy amount of snow. Anything on Joe Mixon's ankle? All right, let's see. Some good stuff on his receiving work from Bobby Slowick. I mean, Joe Mixon is good to go. Like I guess I'm not concerned about Joe Mixon's ankle. Maybe I should be more than I am, but I think the fact that he's playing, he's probably good to go here. So ultimately, looking at matchups, looking at the ownership, who looks the best here? Yeah, I think for me it is Kareem Hunt, probably my favorite play at this point. Just looking at the ownership numbers, and I think the game sets up really well for him. I do like Pacheco quite a bit too. I think it's a close enough split there. And I think you can play them together potentially. Even the tough thing there is we do have some really strong spend up options, but they're expensive enough that I think that they none of them are can't miss at these price tags. I probably agree that Saquon my favorite of the top 3. I mean, yeah, of the pay-ups overall, I think Saquon probably my favorite. Henry can do it against anybody. I don't know. Gibbs, I think I'll be a little bit underweight on. I hesitate to say rank him behind these guys, but I guess I kind of do relative to ownership. I think I'll be light on Gibbs, heavy on Barkley, probably with the field on Henry, light on Kyron. I would guess, if anything, maybe a little bit light on Joe Mixon, probably with the field on Cook. I think with the field to maybe slightly above the field on Montgomery. I'll probably be a little bit light on. I'll probably flip Brian Robinson, Austin Eckler, and then would like to be overweight to Kareem Hunt, Justice Hill, Ty Johnson, Pacheco also. And then I don't think I'm playing any of Gainwell, P. Ryan, Pierce, Agumbawale. Like, you can make the case for Pierce, I guess, if Joe Mixon is out. But even if Joe Mixon's out, like, I just don't think they're going to be. No, sorry, he's playing, not out. But like, if he is limited significantly, I still don't think that he's like he'll be a free square anyway. So I think I'm just kind of cutting off below Ty Johnson here. I think I won't play any of these guys. Okay. And I often do play backup running backs, but I think we have good enough backup running backs who I do like that I don't need to go to the other backup running backs on other teams that I don't want to play. All right, I think I'm going to move to wide receiver, but I'll check in on chat one more time. Hunt or Eckler better for their matchups today? I prefer Hunt. Eckler, mostly because Eckler getting more ownership. Like, I think it's kind of a coin toss, and Eckler getting more ownership. And I think Hunt is more of a sure thing. Like, I think I'd be surprised if Hunt doesn't get at least, 12 touches, where Eckler wouldn't be that shocking that they just lean more on Brian Robinson. Would you, Sean asked, would you play Henry and Hill in the same lineup because that will be a snow game at some point? Yeah, I normally wouldn't on a full slate. I think they're pretty negatively correlated. On a 4-game slate, I think it's like doable. Not my favorite thing to do. I probably wouldn't if I were hand building, but I don't think I'll set a rule against it in the optimizer. All right. Yeah, probably going to be a lot of triple stacking. I think that's true. All right, I'm going to move on to receivers. Apologies if I miss any of your questions as I'm doing my best, but it's tough when it's just me here. Oh yeah, I should update my banner and remind you, if you are not already subscribed to the Flannelverse YouTube channel, would very much appreciate it. I still hoping to get to 5,000 by the end of the NFL season. I have not been pushing it as much as I probably should to get there, but I need to push it at least once per show, a couple times per show. Remind you, I am still trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the NFL season. Have a long ways to go, so would appreciate your support. It's free to subscribe, by the way, so would appreciate it if you do subscribe to the Flannelverse YouTube channel. And of course, I have a Discord also. Not me, the Flannelverse has a Discord. It's been a really good place. Really love that community, and the link is in the description of this video if you want to join. That's also free, at least for now. At some point I might try to monetize it, but I think get in now. It's at least free for right now. Maybe I'll keep it that way. We'll see. Don't know how that all works. All right, let's move on to receivers. And again, sorting by projected fantasy points, Puka Nacua, the clear top here, projects 3 fantasy points better than Amon-Ra St. Brown, the second best. Then you have Amon-Ra at 30%, and Puka getting about 35% projected ownership. Amon-Ra getting 30% projected ownership. Terry McLaurin, the next highest projection. Yeah, not a lot of like really strong fantasy production expected from these receivers today. Terry McLaurin, 23% projected ownership at 6,300. Nico Collins behind him, 17.5 fantasy points, 14% projected ownership. Cooper Kupp. This is interesting. Cooper Kupp still projected for 17 fantasy points, even as he has been not really that involved in the offense. He's only 5,400. I mean, if he gets 6% ownership at 5,400, as much as I think he's probably washed, I'm not this confident. I'm not 94% confident that he's washed. And he's only 50. Yeah. So I think Cooper Kupp at this ownership, I actually do like. AJ Brown getting 21% ownership. What's standing out here? Devonta Smith, 14.5% ownership at 5,600. Khalil Shakir, 5,000. Maybe we should do this one team by team. I think that's probably easiest with the receivers. So I will start with maybe I'll go in the order of the games we're playing here. Probably the easiest way to do this. So let's start with the Chiefs and the Texans. And I'll sort, let's see, by team. So the Chiefs, yeah, I'm not playing Nico Remigio. I don't think you need to play Juju Smith-Schuster or Justin Watson. We'll take a look at the numbers here. I don't think I'm going to anybody outside of Hollywood Brown, Xavier Worthy, DeAndre Hopkins of the Chiefs receivers. Not missing anybody, am I? No, I think it's just those 3. Hopkins is 4,700, coming in at just under 5% ownership. Xavier Worthy getting 26% ownership at 5,200. Hollywood Brown 4,200, getting 18% ownership. And we can look at, what do I want to pull up here? I'm going to pull up the route share report. Yeah, that works for them, especially because they didn't play last week. So they should be fully covered here. And I guess the target share report. So the Chiefs, again, they rested their starters week 18, so we don't really need to look at that. Excuse me. But in the weeks leading up, you can see Travis Kelce running a ton of routes. But of the receivers, Xavier Worthy up to 81% in week 14, 86% week 15, 82%, and 77% to close out the season for Xavier Worthy. DeAndre Hopkins, kind of all over the place. They do have, and again, I don't remember, is it snaps or routes? Somebody can remind me of what the contract situation is for DeAndre Hopkins, but it's something he's limited in some way in terms of the number of snaps he can play or routes he can run. And if he runs too many routes or whatever the metric is, then they have to, a fifth round pick that they give up becomes a fourth round pick or something along those lines. So they've been limiting him somewhat. I don't know if they'll continue to do so in the playoffs. I would suspect they try to, and if they don't get up much. So DeAndre Hopkins probably going to stick around, 60% route participation here. Then you have, Justin Watson, I don't know, he's still pretty involved, down to 18% in week 17 in a game they really wanted to win, and with Marquise Brown. So I think, and they call him Marquise here. Hollywood Brown up from 33.3% route participation in week 16, 51.3% in week 17. So I'm kind of bearing the lead here that I think Hollywood Brown is a fantastic play here at 4,200. I'm sort of shocked at how low the projected ownership is here for Hollywood Brown, 18% projected ownership. To me, he's just a really, really strong play. Somebody I'm probably going to be more than double the field there on Hollywood. Just we saw in those two games where he was limited in terms of route participation, just 33% up to 51% in weeks 16 and 17. Still saw awesome targets. It was like 8 and 7 targets, 15 targets in those two games where he's barely running any routes. I shouldn't say barely. He was over 50% the second one, but still, like, clearly working his way up with the team. Those are his first two games as a Chief. And now they took week 18 off. Then they had a bye week last week. So at this point, like, he's just getting healthier and more acclimated to playing with the team. So I really think Hollywood Brown is just going to, you can see the target share here. I think he's going to be a big part of this offense. I think that's kind of what they've been working towards. So I think he's going to be running more routes, and if the target share holds up, he's going to just be an awesome play at 4,200. And the field apparently not getting there as much as I think they should. My guess is that he comes in a bit higher than this number, like somewhere in the 20s. But if if it's anywhere close to this, I'm going to think he is the best play on the slate. I would probably want to have 50% Hollywood Brown if he comes in at this ownership number. I'm expecting a little bit more, so maybe I'll shoot for like 40% Hollywood. But I think he's just a fantastic play. Xavier Worthy, I think he's okay. He's 5,200, 26% ownership. Like, I would love him if he were also getting very low ownership, especially if he were cheaper. But I think 26% is totally fair for Xavier Worthy. Again, we can look at his the routes have been increasing as the stakes have gotten higher. The targets have been there for Xavier Worthy. And look at this target share: 27.5%, 27%, 24% the last three games. So better than they ever were early in the year. Looks like a really strong player. Hard to argue with the 26% ownership there. So I think Hollywood probably my favorite of the group. Worthy, I think I'm going to be right with the field there at 26%. Looks really strong. And then Hopkins, I also think, like, this is just too low for a guy who is at least capable of some spike weeks. Here, has he done it all recently? Oh, I'm on the wrong. It's advanced passing. I want to go to receiving. All right, I'm just gonna do the game log here for the Chiefs. Taking a minute. There we go. I think they've kind of been saving Hopkins for the playoffs. Maybe not. Maybe they got Hollywood back and they're just like, he's just better. So maybe they don't want to. But so week 17, they're still playing the starters. 4 targets on 43.6% route participation. Week 16, DeAndre Hopkins, 62.2% route participation, still 4 targets. So not really seeing massive targets here. Week 15, 6 targets on 47.6% route participation. Not bad there. I take that. 6 targets. Week 14, 9 targets. So here we're going. 9 targets on 64.3% route participation. Now, this is before Hollywood Brown came back. So it's possible they like Hollywood. They like their young receivers enough that Hopkins is going to get lost in the shuffle. But I'm not that confident that he will be, especially as a veteran in the playoffs. I think they could lean on Hopkins a little bit more here. So 4,700. I'll be double the field here. I think I'll probably have 9-10% Hopkins also. I don't think I'm going to any Juju Smith-Schuster. Again, Justin Watson, as noted. All right, so that's it for Kansas City. I really do, even though I'm not playing a ton of Mahomes, I do like the receivers quite a bit as one-offs. All look like very strong plays. Now, Houston kind of a mess. Again, no Tank Dell. So it's Nico Collins, the pretty clear number 1, projected for, kind of surprisingly, just 14% ownership at 1,600. I guess that's a high enough price tag, makes it a little bit tough. Robert Woods, 1.5%. John Mechie getting 18% ownership at 3,800. I don't think you need to go to Jared Wayne, Xavier Hutchinson. Maybe I'll take a look. I'll only project for 3 fantasy points. So yeah, let's take a look at the game log for Houston. Let's just take a look at the route share report. So we've got in recent weeks. So this does not include the wild card round. So I'll have to look at that separately. So Hutchinson actually in week 18 ran more routes than Mechie. Oh, is this a... No, did John Collins get hurt? I forget what happened here. I'm just going to pull up the more recent one. I don't remember. Was this not a must-win game for Houston? Is that what happened? I think that looks pretty different from the wild card round. All right. So wild card round for the Texans. Hutchinson down to 38.5% route participation. Robert Woods 41%. And Deontay Johnson ran 35.9%. So now he is off the team. So we can get rid of that 36%. Man, what a mess that is. John Mechie 64%, Nico Collins 87%. So again, I think Mechie and Collins are pretty clear top wide receivers for Houston. It is interesting with Deontay Johnson out. Nobody else really seemed to pick up much in terms of projection. Like Hutchinson still just projects for 3 fantasy points. Collins, I think Collins looks like a great play at 14%. Again, I think they're going to be needing to throw quite a bit, trying to keep up with the Chiefs. Nico Collins, like their one reliable pass catching option. 7,600, like high enough price tag that it's tough to play a ton. But I think I want to be force my way to more than 14%. Nico Collins looks great here. Mechie, I think, is a fine value play at 3,800. 18% ownership makes sense there. We have other options that are, I prefer Hollywood at around the same ownership and only 400 more expensive. But I think Mechie seems like a fine salary relief option also. And I don't think I'm going to go to any of Jared Wayne, I guess, is the only other option we're seeing here. I'm not going to any Jared Wayne on a 4-game slate. Yeah, Collins, I think I want to be above weight to the field, probably about with the field um on John Mechie. Oh, Robert Woods is there also projecting for around 3 fantasy points. Yeah, what did he do last week? 41% route participation. Hard to really know where those routes from Deontay Johnson are going to go. Although I guess we can see where he was lining up on the Texans. Deontay, 57% from the slot. So I guess it would look here like Robert Woods more likely to benefit from vacated slot targets or just John Mechie. Pretty similar lining up percentages as Deontay Johnson in the wild card round. So it could just be more John Mechie. I don't know. Hard to know exactly how the split is going to go with the vacated participation from Deontay Johnson. What do we see in week 7 or 18? 17 with Collins still fully good to go. Hutchinson was still running 74%. Mechie 79%. Yeah, so I think it's just probably those three. I think I don't think I'm playing Robert Woods in this one. I think it's just Hutchinson, maybe a little bit. I don't even know if I'll get to Hutchinson. Might just be Collins and Mechie for me. Maybe a little bit, just because he's projected for 1% ownership and he's 3,200. Yeah, I think I'm going to take my stand on just taking Hutchinson, not playing any Robert Woods, and playing 2% David Hutchinson. Probably how I played this. But yeah, Collins looks great. Mechie looks fine. All right. Second game, we have Detroit and the Commanders. And I guess we'll start with the Commanders since they are here at the top. Terry McLaurin obviously looks great. 23% projected ownership. Projects for 18.2 fantasy points. He's only 6,300. So like if we sort by, I'm going to sort by fantasy points again. He's the third highest projection among receivers. And he's only 6,300 and 23% owned. I really like Terry McLaurin here. I think I'll have north of 30% McLaurin. That'll be one of my bigger stands most likely. Yeah, I think it's just a great spot. He's the one reliable pass catcher for the Commanders. Again, we can pull up. Let's pull up this game log again. So last week, when it mattered most, we had Jahmyr Brown running 55% of the routes. In my mind, I swore he got targeted 12 times. Felt like they were going to Jahmyr Brown over and over last week. Apparently, just 5 targets last week. But had a really nice game. Anyway, how many fantasy points did he score? 19.9 fantasy points for Jahmyr Brown last week. Olamide Zaccheaus still ran 50% of the routes. Saw 3 targets in this one. It was interesting because it was different from, and Terry McLaurin obviously saw 10 targets, 77.5% route participation. Why is it going to? Oh, they're playing the Cowboys. So in week 18, again, a must-win game. It was 68% for Olamide Zaccheaus. Now, Jahmyr Brown was coming back from an injury, so I think it was kind of expected that Jahmyr Brown was like he had been the higher in the pecking order than Olamide Zaccheaus prior to coming back. I thought he came back this week. Maybe he didn't. Anyway, it seems the pecking order would go Terry McLaurin, then Jahmyr Brown, then Olamide Zaccheaus. Seems to be the preference there. I really like Terry McLaurin at 23% ownership. Again, going to be north of that number. Sort by team again. Jahmyr Brown, just 11.5% ownership at 3,900. I think that's probably about where I'm going to be. If anything, I would probably go overweight to Jahmyr Brown. I think Zaccheaus again. I think he's probably the wide receiver 3 here. 8.5% protected ownership at 4,300. I prefer Jahmyr Brown. Just cheaper. Is getting more ownership, but I think it's warranted. I think he seems like the better play of that group. But really, Terry McLaurin is the one that I'm taking a big stand on, trying to get overweight to the field. That seems pretty obvious. I'm not saying anything, groundbreaking here, but I think McLaurin looks good. On the Detroit side, actually, let's take a look at the schedule adjusted fantasy points. Before I move on, schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers over the past 5 weeks. Again, great matchup for Houston against Kansas City over the past 5 weeks. Washington, it is a nice matchup against Detroit. So two of the teams we've already looked at have some of the better matchups here. Again, I do think Detroit's defense getting a little bit better here. Baltimore, pretty middling matchup against Buffalo. Rams, a little bit of a tough matchup. And then, as you can see here, really bottom three matchups for Kansas City, Philadelphia, and Detroit. Yeah, I don't think it really changes that much for me. I'm trying to think, like, do I like seeing how good of a matchup it is? Should I like Houston better than I do? But I do like Nico Collins. I'm just not really confident in any other of the pass catchers for Houston. So I think I'm okay with not changing anything there. And same thing for Washington. I think it's just getting tougher against Detroit, even though the past 5 weeks don't really bear that out. I think, like, in particular, that game against the Vikings, it looked like a really strong defense there. All right. So back to Detroit. Everything starts with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Obviously, he's getting 30% ownership. As much as I like him, I think that's probably just around where I want to be. I don't think I'm taking any major stand there. Jamo he's 6,100, getting 18% ownership. Seems okay. Let's take a look at the game log here. Up to 83% route participation in week 18 for Jamo. 7 targets apiece for Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam LaPorta, Jameson Williams. I do think, like, everybody hurts a little bit with Dave Montgomery coming back. I think the splits with Dave Montgomery in versus out, they all look better with Dave Montgomery out. They just one less weapon for Detroit, so they pass the ball a little bit more. But I think Jamo, low enough ownership that I think it's fine. I don't think he is a, like, slam dunk must play him type play, because he is 6,100. It's not like he's 4,800. I would love him in that case, but at 6,100, he does need to put up a big score. Probably more than like 15 fantasy points on a 4-game slate, I would guess, which he certainly can, but I think 18% is about right there. Yeah, I don't think I'm taking any major stands on Detroit. I mean, Tim Patrick, I really like on Showdown, but 4% for the full slate seems about fine. Again, let's take a look at, they didn't play last week, so we can just take a look at the route share report. Tim Patrick just over 50% each of the past 3 games. Target share report. Yeah, Tim Patrick, man, not great in recent weeks. He saw a little spike there in the middle, but not really involved at all in recent weeks. I think 4% is fine. I'll play him on Showdown. All right, so I've covered the Saturday receivers. We'll move on to the Sunday games, but I'll check in on chat before I continue because it's on a different screen. All right, let's see. All right, a lot of Nico Collins talk. All right, I'm not going to scroll all the way up, I don't think. If you have any questions that I missed, feel free to repost them. It looks like you're talking about other positions primarily. Red Slingo says he hates Jamo this week. I think he's fine. Like, he's one of those players that obviously, like, always has big play upside. Oh, Marshawn Lattimore. Good question. Yeah, does Lattimore cover Jamo? That's a good point. I should bring up what is expected in the wide receiver cornerback matchup report. So we're expecting, you can see the green highlight is projected to be a shadow situation. So projecting for Trent McDuffie to shadow Nico Collins. We don't have it as, Fantasy Points. I had nothing to do with this. Fantasy Points does not have it as a shadow situation, but they do have Marshawn Lattimore as the primary corner on Jamo. So that's worth noting. Looks like a better matchup. I mean, actually, it doesn't look like a better. I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown, it's actually a more negative matchup against Noah Igbenaji. And then Tim Patrick has just not a great matchup for any of them. All right, interesting. Any other coverage? No other projected. That Nico Collins is the only projected shadow situation on the slate. from fantasy points. So, all right, good to know. All right, I will move on to the Sunday receivers. All right. Looks like you've asked about a lot of questions that I think I just answered, so I think we're good. All right. Moving on to the Sunday game receivers. So let's see. Philly and the Rams is the first game there. And again, it's been a really tough matchup in recent weeks. Again, going back to schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed per game to receivers. It is the second worst matchup against LA, which is interesting because I think of it as being a much tougher matchup for the LA receivers than the Philadelphia receivers. But in recent weeks, not the case. It has been quite tough. We have AJ Brown is at 7,000 projected for 21% ownership. I think I'll probably be somewhat light on that just because I like Terry McLaurin better. He's 700 cheaper. He's getting 2% more ownership there, but I think just better matchup. I'd rather play more Terry, so I think I'll be a little bit light on AJ Brown. Devontae Smith, I think 5,600, 14.5% ownership. Like that's a low enough price tag that I probably come in slightly overweight on Devontae Smith. I will not be going to any Johnny Wilson or Jahan Dotson or Paris Campbell. I think it's just the top two receivers for me on the 4-game slate for Philadelphia. I know Jahan Dotson scored the touchdown last week. That was the only catch, right? He still didn't put up a great score even with the touchdown. They were targeting him quite a bit, and they were targeting him quite a bit like in the red zone. So he could have really put us out of our misery, but I don't think he scored that many fantasy points even with the touchdown. And I don't think that repeats itself. So I think I'm only on AJ Brown and Devontae Smith here. And if Jahan Dotson scores 2 touchdowns and buries me, I guess I can live with that. On the Ram side, again, we have Puka Nacua looks great. He projects the best of any receiver on the slate by like 3 fantasy points, and the ownership not really out of hand at 35%. I do think I probably come in slightly underweight to Puka. I don't know. Not by much, but I think I probably come in a little bit underweight to Puka because of the price tag and because it is a tough matchup with Philadelphia. So yeah, I think I probably come in 30-ish%, 25 to 30 on Puka, most likely. Cooper Kupp, pretty interesting seeing the 6% projected ownership. I think Matt was in chat. Matt Butler was saying that we have seen the separation stats for Cooper Kupp have gotten really bad since like week 15. I lost the comment from Matt, but he was posting earlier, and it's kind of in line with what we've all seen. Like even his great catch last week, I think he only had the 1 catch in that game. Didn't really create any kind of. Yeah, Matt says Kupp separation data has plummeted since week 15, which directly correlates with his lack of production. I can send you the exact numbers. Too much for chat. You don't need to send me the exact numbers. But I trust you on that. Like the eye test matches what we're seeing there. I still think, fell off a cliff. Everybody, I'm sort of surprised by that projection for Kupp. So maybe that's one that I want to double check here. So Kupp projected at RG for 16.8. Where does fantasy points have it? Because like that projection, that really stands out. Fantasy points has it at 8.6. That's kind of nuts how big you don't see projections that different very often. I wonder what the difference is there. But I like 16.8 feels like it's just too high of a projection for me. I kind of think split the difference there is probably where it should be. I think projecting him for like 11 makes sense for Cooper Kupp, but I don't do projections. I am just making shit up. So seems like everybody is. If the projections are going to be this different, I think it's just a really tough spot to project with the recent decline in performance. But he hasn't really been targeted much in recent weeks. I think just given the price tag, the ownership, I'm probably going to be with the field. Like I can't fully fade Cooper Kupp. I think I've been. We've seen it too many times where he suddenly sees double-digit targets. Hasn't really happened this year as much recently. I still think 6% is low enough that I'm intrigued there. Because I think it could come in lower than that after last week being terrible. I don't think we really saw much of Tutu Atwell last week, which was kind of a surprise. Now, where does fantasy points have him? They haven't projected for 1.5. Yeah, I think it's worth looking at so last week in particular. Puka ran 96% of the routes. Yeah, it was, and I kind of liked Tutu Atwell last week because he had been, did he not run a single route last week? He had been in recent weeks, like not running that many routes, but like they kept targeting him. I guess not in week 17, saw 0 targets. But 8 targets in week 18. In week 16, I guess saw just 2 targets. Week 15 saw 2 targets. I don't know, like the targets relative to his routes were really high. And then he ran 0 routes last week. So scares me a little bit on Tutu Atwell. I suspect that he does get some run tomorrow. But really, really hard to trust it because that was obviously a game they needed to win. They're not really pulling any tricks here. Demarcus Robinson, though, 72.4% route participation, still just saw 2 targets in that game. Good to see him finally score some fantasy points, right? He caught at least one of those, if I'm remembering right. Yeah, 23 yards. Go DeMarcus. I don't know. They seem to trust him more than they trust Tutu Atwell in the playoffs. But Tutu Atwell projected for 0.5%. I'm shocked by this 6.9 projection on Tutu. I don't know. I don't think I missed any kind of injury or anything. I think they just didn't use him last week. So I think DeMarcus at 3% ownership at 4,000. I'll probably play some of that. I don't think I'm going to go to Tutu just because I think the risk reward is not really worth it. If he scores 20 fantasy points, I'll really regret it. But he's not getting any kind of ownership, and I don't really think he should have much of a projection. So I don't know if I'm playing Tutu or Jordan Whittington. I do think I'll play some Cup. I think I'll be over 6%. I think I'll be a little bit light on Puka Nacua, but hard to really argue with the number. And then DeMarcus Robinson, I suspect I'll have 3, 4, 5%. I think I'll be over this number, but not significantly. And then the final game for wide receivers, Buffalo, Baltimore. Again, I've talked about, I really like the quarterbacks, so I have to like somebody here, but I don't think I love anybody on Buffalo in particular. I don't love any of the receivers. I guess one more reason that I like Lamar better is really tough to love any of these Buffalo receivers. I mean, Khalil Shakir projected for 32% ownership of 5,000. Like that seems too high to me. Curtis Samuel, 3%. Keon Coleman, 5%. Let's take a look at the route shares here. And I'll just start with last week, what it looked like, and you'll see how gross it looks. So in the wild card game, Shakir led the way at just 59.4% route participation and 6 targets. Those both led the team last week. So nobody's really getting elite usage on Buffalo. Now they get a really tough matchup with Baltimore, 5th worst matchup. Obviously, like I think they're going to score points here. So I don't want to read too much into the matchup, but it is a tough matchup. It's in tough weather. And they just spread the ball around so much. So even though I like Josh Allen, it's really tough to make the decision, okay, who do you want to play with Josh Allen? And I think it's going to be somewhat ownership dependent here. So we have Shakir getting a ton of ownership. I like Shakir, but I don't like him at 32%. I think I'll be significantly underweight, probably 20% Khalil Shakir, maybe not even. Cooper, you may recall, I loved him last week, thought he was going to be awesome, that maybe they were going to use him more in the playoffs. That didn't really pay off at all. 41% route participation, saw 3 targets in the game, did immediately see an end zone target, was feeling good kind of early, but they were just running a rotation. I do think that, and I said this last week, I was less confident in him because he missed significant time between their final game and the wild card game. So it's possible that with another week now, like being back at practice, being with the team, that they will use him more. I'm not super confident in that. I'm not super confident in anything with the Bills. So that's part of the issue is how do you trust any of these guys? Shakir, like clearly the most trustworthy, but like I said, getting the most ownership. Coleman, 5% ownership at 4,100. Okay. 47% routes, 3 targets last week. I think it's fine. I'll probably be above that number because I'm probably wanting to play more Josh Allen, and I do want to stack him generally. I do think that Cooper, I'm probably going to lean more into Cooper just because I think that there is more. Still, I think there's more upside, like that he could just, okay, now he's ready for 65% route participation, and he's a better receiver than, I don't know, the most of the other receivers, not like has the pedigree at least. So Cooper, I do think I'll be above 2% again. I think I'm going to try that one again. 5% Coleman seems fine. 32% Shakir, clearly too much. 3% Samuel seems fine. 2% Mac Hollins seems fine. Just I wish I could give you some great stance on the Bills, but all I can give you is I think 32% Khalil Shakir is too much. And I'm taking shots on Amari Cooper, but going to feel pretty dumb when they go the whole first drive and he doesn't see the field, I think. So I don't know. Be careful, I guess, with the Bills. I do still have a ton of interest in some Ravens receivers. Rashad Bateman only targeted twice last week. We kind of were hopeful that he was going to step into that top receiver role with Zay Flowers out, but he was shadowed by Joey Porter in that game. So I think that might have been part of the reason Rashad Bateman didn't see a ton of usage. The price tag and the ownership are high enough that I'm not like overly enthusiastic about it, but I do think I'll be overweight to 18% Rashad Bateman here. I think they're going to be, scoring a lot of fantasy points here. They're going to need to throw a lot in a game with a good Bills team on the other side. And where is it in terms of schedule adjusted? It is a slightly above average matchup. But just looking at they didn't have the bye, so we have to look at last week here. 81% route participation last week for Rashad Bateman. Again, just 2 targets, but like look at the targets across the team. Nobody really was being targeted all that much. Tough matchup with Pittsburgh. I think it's a better matchup here in general for the Ravens. So I really do like Rashad Bateman. Wish he was coming in a little bit lower owned than he is, but I think that's still a fine number for Bateman. Probably going to be one of my primary targets in Raven stacks with Lamar. And then behind Bateman, I mean, we'll get to the tight ends, but Tylan Wallace, 54% route participation. Nelson Aguilar, I kind of thought was going to be playing ahead of Tylan Wallace, even though he was a healthy scratch in week 18. Didn't come out that way, 35% route share there. So it's mostly going to be Rashad Bateman. And then I think Tylan Wallace probably will be my second favorite here, coming in at 5%. I mean, he's min price 3,000, min price for receiver. Under 5% ownership. I think that's fine. I think I'll probably be slightly above that number. I don't think I'm going to any Tez Walker, Steven Sims, Anthony Miller. Aguilar seems fine at 3% ownership. So I guess Bateman is the one of the receivers that I'm leaning into the most. All right, I think that does it for receivers here. I will check in, see if we have any questions in chat, anything like that. All right. Rant's loading up the 2-game slate. I'm not even playing the 2-game slate, mostly because I'm doing this show. So I don't have time to do both, I don't think. I tend to trust wide receivers that don't wear shoes. Yes, Mac Hollins, a lock for you. All right. Let's see. Does the projected bad weather sway your decision at all about the wide receivers in the Rams-Eagles game? Not really affecting it that much. I mean, I guess to some extent, like, no, I don't think the weather is playing that big of an impact for me. But yeah, it's not bad enough that it feels like we need to downgrade them significantly. Collins or St. Brown, or are they both must-haves for the Saturday games only? So you mean for just the 2-game slate? I probably wouldn't call them must-haves. I'd have to see the ownership. I'm guessing like at ownership, I think I prefer Nico Collins. I'm guessing he's coming in significantly lower owned on that slate also. Yeah, it was kind of nuts. That's a good call out. That's why they were not playing so much Tutu Atwell, is because they just were playing a ton of their tight ends last week, and it was like Higbee the first quarter put up 11 fantasy points, and they just continued leading on. Davis Allen scored the touchdown. They kept throwing it to tight ends quite a bit. That's a good note from Matt there. All right, let's see. What are we talking about? Will thinks that McLaurin ends up being 2 or 3 times as owned as AJ Brown. You're probably right. Like maybe not 3 times. I'd be surprised by that. But after like just the recency bias of seeing AJ Brown absolutely dud last week and now kind of a tough matchup, and Terry is significantly cheaper, I think you're maybe overshooting it, but you're probably right that the ownership is definitely going to move in that direction. Yeah. All right. Is that the Will? Are you the Hard Talks guy? Is that the name? I forget what the bit is. All right. Tight ends. Moving down. You know the deal says he's slamming Noah Gray. I don't think Noah Gray looks as good recently as he once did. So I don't think I'm with you on slamming Noah Gray, but we'll talk about the tight ends. All right. Okay. And I'm going to sort here by, we don't need to do the team by team with tight ends. I'm just going to sort by fantasy points. Travis Kelce, 15 projected fantasy points, 27% ownership. He's only 5,000. We saw it last year, just like, oh, it's the playoffs. I guess we'll start using Travis Kelce. That's probably going to happen once again here. I think Kelce looks pretty good here. I probably come in a little bit underweight to 27% just because maybe not. I don't know. Like, again, I don't think I'm playing a ton of Mahomes. I do really like the pass catchers. Maybe that'll be my struggle as I end up with a lot of like 2 Chiefs in my teams, and then Mahomes just makes sense for them. I think 27% seems okay for Kelce. Zach Ertz projected. That's interesting. Ertz projecting better than LaPorta, Andrews. What does fantasy points have it at? I'm curious here if that is consistent. No. Okay, they have Ertz significantly lower. This is, I think, probably close to where I would have it. Ertz being a little bit lower down the list. Doesn't show a ton of upside. He did have a couple touchdowns, I think, two games ago, maybe. But I don't think I love Ertz. But he is getting like projected for low ownership. So I think he's a fine play. Actually, before we move on, let's take a look at the schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position in recent weeks. Looks like a great matchup for Dallas Goedert. We saw him come back from injury, and he was immediately targeted a ton. So now I think he's going to continue to be targeted a ton. Not a ton, but I think he'll continue to see targets in a great matchup. It is a nice spot for Baltimore tight ends, and again with Zay Flowers, we did see Isaiah Likely benefit a bit last week. Mark Andrews should benefit a bit also. Ertz does have a positive matchup over the past 5 weeks in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. Middling matchup for Dalton Schultz and Travis Kelce. Below average matchup for Buffalo. Below average for LaPorta. League worst matchup for Higbee and the Rams. Interesting. Okay. Gotta refresh myself on some of these. So I mean, if Ertz does come in at 6%, I would like that number. I would be kind of surprised if he comes in at 6%. Maybe, but a lot of people playing Jayden Daniels, and he's the second best. Probably going to have the second most ownership of the pass catching options. Sam LaPorta at 4,200, 18% ownership looks pretty good to me. Not a bad spot for Sam LaPorta. Dave Montgomery coming back, I believe, negatively impacts Sam LaPorta. I believe there's negative correlation in their fantasy points. I don't have it in front of me, but I believe there's some negative correlation there. But still, 4,200, cheap enough. He has been, very, very involved in recent weeks. Actually, I'm just going to look at LaPorta, not all lines. So 7 targets in week 18, 8 targets a week prior to that, 6, 10, 7, 6, 6. And again, a lot of these without David Montgomery, which maybe impacts things a little bit. Let's see. When did Montgomery last play? Week 15. Okay. So he was playing 13, 14, 15. And we still saw in those weeks 6, 7, 10 targets for Sam LaPorta. So I'm not that concerned about it. And he's only 4,200. It is a bad matchup by this metric, but I'm not overly concerned about it. I think it's fine. Mark Andrews, 4,500, getting 14%. Again, I really like Lamar, and outside of Rashad Bateman, really kind of including Rashad Bateman, don't have a ton of confidence in the receiver. So I do think I'll be playing a lot of Lamar with his tight ends. Mark Andrews looks great to me here. Dalton Schultz, 14% ownership at 3,300. Dallas Goedert, 8% ownership at 3,900. Dalton Kincaid, 9% at 3,700. Isaiah Likely, 3,500, 16% ownership. Tyler Higbee, 1% projected ownership would be kind of surprising to me after the first quarter you had last week. Noah Gray, projected for sub 1% ownership and 4 fantasy points. So, all right. So just going down, who do I like the best of the tight ends? If Dallas Goedert is going to get 8% ownership in this really nice matchup for tight ends, probably going to have a ton of Dallas Goedert interest. Maybe I'd still rank Mark Andrews ahead because I just think that I'm going to play a lot of Lamar. So I probably end up with more Mark Andrews than Dallas Goedert. Kelsey, kind of his own thing because he's getting so much ownership. But I think the ownership is warranted. So he's somewhere in the mix towards the top of my tight end list. But I think Mark Andrews relative to ownership, probably my favorite, followed by Dallas Goedert. I do like Isaiah Likely, and we can look at the benefit of not having Zay Flowers on Isaiah Likely. Let's look at his. So up to 65.4% route participation in the wildcard round. 4 targets, which is, I think he actually led the team with 4 targets. They just didn't throw much in that game. But like clearly benefited somewhat. Like that was his second most route participation, or third most, I guess, route participation on the year with Isaiah Likely out. So I think he did benefit somewhat. Probably going to run more routes here. So yeah, I think Likely looks pretty good at his price tag. Also, so both Baltimore guys and Dallas Goedert probably my top 3 here. If Higbee comes in at 1% owned, even in a really tough matchup, given like they were scheming, like they seemed intent on getting him the ball last week, I would love him at 1% ownership if he actually comes in there. Maybe I'll pull up because Fantasy Points doesn't do projected ownership here. So let me just take a look at some other projected ownership sources on my own right now, and I'll see how consistent these things are. All right, where are we? Because I think it could vary pretty drastically. All right. Yeah, Higbee, he's projected for more ownership other places, but still not an extreme amount. Pulling up a third source here, double checking. At low ownership, even in a tough matchup, Higbee does look really good to me. Yeah, everywhere like sub 5% across the board. So Higbee looks like a pretty strong play here. Goddard still everywhere looks pretty low owned. So I do think the Baltimore guys, Dallas Goedert, Tyler Higbee relative to really low ownership, like I probably want 10% there. Kelsey's ownership makes sense to me. LaPorta elsewhere is projected for very significant ownership. Yeah. So, okay. That's seemed a little bit low. This projected ownership on LaPorta, 18%, is probably not. He's probably going to come in higher than that. If he does come in at 18%, I think he looks great. Other places have him in like the 30% range, at which point he's a little bit scarier. But he has to be in the conversation anyway. Maybe he comes in under 25% and looks great. He would probably still rank behind the Baltimore guys for me and Goddard, but just behind them. Higbee, again, kind of his own thing because he's getting such low ownership. I don't think, and Ertz, again, 6% here. Let me actually look at other sources for Ertz also. Yeah, higher. Everywhere else has Ertz a little bit higher. Again, I would love him at 6%. I don't really think he's going to get 6% ownership. And I think I'll probably end up, 8% Ertz, something like that. So probably under what he actually comes in at. Kincaid. All right, let's take a look at the Chiefs and the Bills in their recent games. So Chiefs, because I know somebody said he wanted to play Noah Gray a lot. Actually, maybe I'll just look up Noah Gray specifically. So he's down to 13% route share in they're resting their starters. Let's not factor this in, but 25.6% in week 17 saw just one target. Week 16, 35.6% just saw one target. And these are the two games that Marquise Brown played. So I think as Marquise Brown took on a bigger role, we saw Noah Gray lose some of that route participation, had already lost some, 36% in week 15. And he had been, look at that. This is the stretch where I loved Noah Gray, but he just started losing after week 11, 49%, 46%, 43%, 36%, 36%. So I don't know. I think he's playable, but not somebody like, I don't know that I'll get to any shares of Noah Gray on the 4-game slate. I think on the short slate, he looks better. If you're playing the 2-gamer or Showdown, he looks okay there. Anybody else? We have no Cade Stover. Is Irv Smith next man up as the backup there? Getting no ownership, 2 fantasy point projection seems okay. If you need the min salary, he's probably the best min salary option. But I don't know that I get too much, if any, of the min price guys. John Bates right there. Yeah, I think no Gray probably if I'm paying down this low. Actually, Dawson Knox, the Bills. Let's look there also. So in the wild card round, Dawson Knox 41% route participation, Dalton Kincaid 53%. 3 targets each for Kincaid and Knox. I don't know. I feel like we've been waiting so long for Dalton Kincaid to break out, and it's just not really happening. He has not taken over as the lead tight end there. Week 17, Kincaid, 59% route participation, 2 targets. Dawson Knox, 38%, 3 targets. It's really hard to love Kincaid here. Knox seems fine at 4%. I guess 9% ownership is low enough that I'm probably not going to be too far off, but I'm not enthusiastic about Kincaid. All right, I think that's enough about tight ends. Who's Higbee's backup? Higbee's playing this week, so we don't really have to worry about his backup. I guess we can look at last week who played after he left. I think it was, Davis Allen scored the touchdown. Pretty sure Parkinson was in there a bit. So 4 routes for Hunter Long last week, 10 for Higbee before he got hurt. Davis Allen, 4 routes. Colby Parkinson, 12. So I guess Colby Parkinson looks the best of the tight ends behind Higbee. But I'm expecting Higbee to have the most work here. Defenses, I have not given a ton of thought to. I usually just kind of let the randomizer choose. I don't know. Do you want to lean into the weather here at all? I kind of like Detroit defense. here as a like kind of low owned option. I guess they're getting 15%, not super low. The Chiefs look great here. Just we saw how much of a mess Houston looked like in the first half last week. I wouldn't be that shocked if they look like that both halves this week. Just a ton of sacks. I think the Chiefs defense is just so good. So if they're really at 9% ownership, I actually think they would be my favorite defense on the slate. Let's see if there's any good like pay down options. I guess the Commanders look okay. The Rams, I mean, 10% owned. They actually look pretty good to me. All right, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on defenses. Should we take a brief look at the showdown slates before I move on and go make my lineups? All right, I'll do that. Yeah. So I'm going to go to questions lineup / just brief look at the showdowns. All right. I don't want to change that. I'm going to go to first game. Starting at captain. Again, Mahomes, I'm going to be underweight to 21.5% Mahomes at captain. That's too much in my opinion. Collins looks good at 15%. Kelsey looks great at 11%. Pretty inexpensive. Mixon looks okay at 10%. Worthy 7%. I probably want to be over that number. Stroud 6.5%. Again, he might run a little bit more again, so I think that's a good number. Mechie getting 5% as a pay down option. I mean, I love Hollywood here. Hollywood Brown at 3.6%. Probably my favorite. Maybe my favorite when you factor in ownership and price tag, like what you can do there. Actually, Hunt is around the same price and ownership, so it's between those two. I think when you factor in the price and ownership, Hollywood and Hunt both look awesome to me. Hopkins 2% ownership, a little bit more expensive, but looks okay. But yeah, I think my biggest stand is I'm going to be definitely well underweight on 21.5% to Mahomes. I think both Hunt and Hollywood probably my favorite relative to ownership and stuff. But Nico Collins also just of the Nico Collins and Travis Kelce, I like quite a bit as pay up options. And then in the flex, more okay with Mahomes in the flex, but 56.5% still probably a little bit too high for me. Stroud I like at 40% at just 9,000 price tag. Nico looks good, 41%. I'll be underweight on Joe Mixon here at 39%. Worthy at 8,200, 35.5% looks okay. Kelsey I prefer. Like if I'm choosing between these two, Chelsea a little bit cheaper and lower owned. So I guess I would go to Kelsey over Worthy there because it's kind of a coin flip. He actually projects better than Worthy here. That's interesting. Dalton Schultz just 4,400. Looks good. 27.5% ownership given the price tag looks pretty good. Again, I'm gonna love Hollywood Brown. 25% ownership at 6,600. Kareem Hunt 6,400. 21%. I really like that. Kareem Hunt. Pacheco a little bit more expensive, getting about the same amount of ownership. Prefer Hunt. Again, I think he's just maybe the leader of the split there. I do think Chiefs defense looks awesome. 5,600. They're getting 20% ownership. I think I want to be over that number. I think CJ Stroud could just fall apart in this game. As good as he looked last week, I might be totally wrong here, but his Chiefs defense is it's really good. So I think this could be where they finally fall apart. So I like the Chiefs defense. Butker, 5,000, 17% ownership. Looks pretty good. Hopkins, more expensive here. 16% is okay, but it's still like that's a high enough price tag. I don't think I come in overweight to that. Texans defense, 14% seems fine. Samaje Perine, 8.5%. If we really want to pay down, Irv Smith, probably a better showdown play. 3% projected ownership at 600. I kind of like that. Just because K. Dotton is out. If you want to play for Joe Mixon being a little bit banged up, maybe they play a little bit more of Dameon Pierce, 2,000, 1% owned. I kind of like that, making that just what if Joe Mixon is a little bit less than full health. I don't like love it, but 1% is low enough. I'd take shots there. Or Gumbawale. 3% seems okay. Gray. He's 4,000 is expensive enough that I don't love it. I think Hutchinson actually looks pretty good as potential beneficiary of getting rid of Deontay Johnson. 7% ownership. Yeah, I like Hutchinson here. Better than Woods, who's getting more ownership. Yeah, and then maybe I'll make a quick lineup for that one, and then take a brief look at the other showdown, and then I'm going to get out of here. All right, showdown. Started in half an hour. I'm going to build like it's for a large field tournament. I'm going to throw in Nico. No, I'm going to throw in Kelsey in the captain. Then Nico. I'm just going to throw in the guys I like. Brown, Hunt, Chiefs defense. And you have 8,800 left over. Boom. 600 left on the table. Could have done Hopkins there instead, I suppose, but I think this looks Chiefs onslaught. No Mahomes, which I don't know. 3 pass catchers without Mahomes is a little bit sketchy here. I don't know that I love that, but I think given his price tag and projected ownership, I think it could work out. And the PPR scoring, I think this is okay with not having Mahomes here. It's borderline because I'm spending quite a bit on Worthy, Brown, and Kelsey. So I could flip out Collins for Mahomes and then pay down somewhere else for a Texans player, but I don't know. I think this is borderline okay with the having 3 Chiefs pass catchers and no Mahomes, given the constraints. I could also just take out Kelsey and put in Mahomes. No, I couldn't afford that. Yeah, I think I'm okay with that. All right, brief look at the other showdown slate for today, and then I'll do another show tomorrow. Captain. Gibbs getting 18%, Daniels 13%, Amon-Ra 11%, Goff 10%, LaPorta 7.5%, McLaurin 7%, Montgomery 6%. So yeah, I think standing out to me here, like Gibbs a bit much just given the price tag. Daniels 13% feels pretty good. Amon-Ra looks really good to me at 11%. Goff is kind of meh. I like McLaurin at 7%. He's probably my favorite captain option here. Montgomery cheap enough, 6% looks okay. JMO 5% seems like a pretty good captain bet. Eckler 2.5% looks pretty good at captain. Again, Lions defense. As much as I love Jayden Daniels, he's still a rookie in the playoffs. He seems like he's totally poised, but I think the Lions defense is good enough that it's at least like probably underrepresented that the Lions defense could have a lot of success here. So I think 2% at captain is, I think that's fine. I actually don't really like that number that much. Jayden, I do think I'm going to have quite a bit of, like probably over 46.5%. Goff is 1,200 cheaper and getting lower ownership, but I still think I probably am underweight to Goff here. Gibbs seems okay, 10,600, 37.5%. Amon-Ra, I like. Terry McLaurin, I mean, I love that number if he comes in at 32.5%. He's pretty expensive. I like him better at captain, but I think this is a good number, fine number. LaPorta I'll have a ton of. He's only 5,600, just mispriced, it seems. 5,600, 30% owned. I'll be above the field on LaPorta. Montgomery, I'm okay with it. And I think you can play Montgomery and Gibbs together, and that'll be probably underused by the field. So I think Montgomery looks okay. Zacchaeus getting 25% ownership to Jahmyr Brown. I guess they're both getting about 25%. I prefer Jahmyr Brown if they're going to come in at the same ownership. He's cheaper. They seem to prefer him over Zacchaeus when he is fully healthy. So yeah, I prefer Jahmyr Brown there. Ertz is okay at 5,400. Again, LaPorta just like better. I do think Eckler, he's cheaper than Brian Robinson here. They're getting about the same ownership. So I significantly like Eckler if they're going to get about the same ownership. Save some of that price. They're probably going to need to throw a bit. I still think, even though it's not really supported by the numbers that much, I think he's their preferred pass catching back. Lions defense, 4,200, 19% owned. I love it. I'm going to have a ton of the Lions defense here. Commanders defense actually is fine, also at 3,200, 17%. Jake Bates, love that. 5,000, 18% owned. Even as aggressive as they are, he can kick it from anywhere. So I still think he's a pretty good play at 5,000 at 18%. I think I want to be over that number. Tim Patrick, just 13% owned. Again, not targeted a lot recently, but he's 3,600, running over 50% of the routes. And not a lot of great, really cheap options, unfortunately. So I think like the mid-range kind of makes lineups work. Go into the defenses and kickers and cheaper running backs. Kind of makes things work. Kind of a necessary. So that's why I think I particularly like Eckler, LaPorta on this slate, because they just and the defenses just allow you, and kickers allow you to do much more with your lineups. So maybe I'll play with one of these also, and then I'll get out of here. And check in on any questions. All right. I'm going to start with McLaurin at captain. I'm going to throw in Jayden Daniels. And then from there, I probably do. I do kind of like the idea of a just Lions crush them too. So maybe I'll do this one first. Maybe I'll do two here real quick. Eckler, since I'm not doing a Lions crush, I'll throw Eckler in there. I think he looks good. LaPorta at 5,600. So now you still need to find a pretty cheap option. I think Tim Patrick makes sense for this lineup. And then Jamo, I guess, man, this one would not have Gibbs or St. Brown or Goff. That's a little bit tough. Almost works with Jamo. I don't know that I love it, though. Maybe I should get away from Eckler in this one and go a little bit cheaper. Lions defense for making it more contrarian, and then throw in St. Brown. That looks pretty good. I don't hate that. Got the captain Washington going up against the Lions defense. Jayden Daniels makes it in there. Yeah, I think this looks like a pretty good large field tournament lineup, leaving 1,300 on the table. I also like the idea of... Actually, I don't hate the idea of doing an onslaught if you want to play that type way with Jayden Daniels at captain and then throw in multiple pass catchers and just hope he does it all through the air. But I also like the idea of just building for what happens if the Lions just crush and like the Commanders can't do anything, in which case I would like Gibbs at captain and Montgomery and Lions defense. And then you could also, extend it to Jake Bates. Need to have someone representing the Commanders somewhere. Now here could be a what if they're throwing it a lot to Eckler, and then there you go. Instead of playing Daniels, I'm playing Amon-Ra, St. Brown. Full onslaught. I could just go Daniels here instead, but that uses basically the full salary cap. But I think this makes sense for what if the Commanders just can't really do much against this Detroit defense, and Detroit is as good as always, has a lot of the best plays in here. I think this looks pretty good for a large field tournament. Okay. I'm going to check in on comments. Let's see. Stefan, I don't want to talk about it. Okay. I did not get any BBMs to the final this year. Didn't even come close. Yeah, Sean, I'm just doing the showdown for tonight right now. I'm not doing another show later. Let's see. Checking in 4 touchdown scores. You just want me to give you touchdown scores? Touchdown scores for the full weekend My best bets would be Saquon. Man, I mean, Mark Andrews always scores touchdowns, right? I can see it last week. It'd probably start with the running backs. Like it'd be Saquon and Derrick Henry and Jahmyr Gibbs and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Maybe 4 best touchdown scorers here. All right. Lamar hurts. It's Lamar for me on the 4 game slate. I love Lamar. I love the 2 quarterbacks from the last game. James Cook, I think is fine. He's getting like 15% owned. I'm not like super in love with James Cook here. Like Baltimore's defense is just really good. So I don't think it's a spot that I'm losing my voice. Damn. I don't think it's a spot that I'm like slamming James Cook, but I think I'm probably with the field. Yeah, about 15% ownership at 6,700. High enough price tag that I'm not. They're down Ray Davis this week. But yeah, probably not getting to there much more than the field. Probably right with the field on James Cook. All right. I think I got to go and make my lineups. Wait, I saw a question on Diami. Go Diami, no question. All right. I'm going to get out of here, go make my lineups. Again, if you have not already done so, if you could subscribe to the channel, very much would appreciate it. Showing me that support. I'll be back tomorrow prior to those games to go over the 2-game Sunday slate, and I will do a brief look at those showdowns also. Let's get it. Let's make some money on this one. Thank you all for hanging out with me during the show. Again, like, subscribe, comment, all very helpful. Subscribe to the Discord if you are interested. The link is in the description of this video. All right. Thanks, guys. I'll catch you tomorrow. Good luck.